Hi, I'm Blake Crooks, and I'm a counselor at the Appalachian State University Counseling and Psychological Services Center, and I'm joined by one of my colleagues.
I'm Julie Keys. I'm also a counselor at Appalachian State's Counseling Center.
And today we're going to be presenting a workshop on pride and LGBTQ plus resiliency during COVID-19. And before we get started, we're just going to cover a little bit of informed consent.
So this workshop, like all the virtual workshops that we're doing this summer, are intended to be psychoeducational, meaning it's some information about mental health as opposed to providing actual therapy or other kinds of treatment or response to the emergency. If you're interested in treatment, we definitely encourage you to visit our website or give us a call and we can talk more about options we offer. We also have emergency mental health information on our site, and you can also call for more information about that. We do try to give you resources in your area, as that can sometimes be more helpful in the case of an emergency. This workshop is also being recorded and will be shared on social media and YouTube. Only our presenters' videos and screens will be visible in the recordings.
So to get started, we're going to cover a little bit about Pride history. So 51 years ago, June 28th, there was the Stonewall riots, and that greatly shifted the civil rights movement for LGBTQ rights. And even looking at like the history during this time period, just the year previous to this, the DSM, which is the manual that mental health providers use to provide diagnoses for mental health illnesses. It was published for the first time the year prior to this, and also included homosexuality as a disorder. So just thinking about the historical context of what was going on in our country during this time, that's a fact to add to that. But for the LGBTQ plus community during this time, if you were acting in a way that might lead someone to believing that you were part of the community, that was considered disorderly and you could be arrested for that. And so for many people, they were finding refuge and safe havens in gay bars, and there were a lot of police raids that were happening for these places. And so even those places that were kind of like a shelter where you could be yourself were being attacked. So on June 28th, and the police raid at Stonewall was happening. And this one was a little different, and there was a lot of resistance that happened. And two people that were part of that resistance have been erased in the past from LGBTQ plus history. It's really important for us to acknowledge that these were trans women of color, and, as well as drag queens that were part of this movement. And so Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were two of these leaders. And their work for LGBTQ plus rights didn't just stop there. They were pretty active in their work for activism and advocacy. Unfortunately, within the community, they were not always welcomed due to their identities. There was a lot of in-group fighting about who should be leaders, and a lot of times white, cis, gay, and lesbian people were kind of being put at the front of the movement to appeal to the rest of American culture. And so it's really important for us to acknowledge like who were the people that were played core roles in this movement, and make sure we acknowledge and honor those people. So this year's Pride Month is going to look a little different than last year's and years before.
Yeah, one of the many unfortunate things that's come out of the pandemic is that a lot of Pride events have been canceled or rescheduled. An article in Time about a month ago said that 220 had been canceled at that point, so we can assume it's probably more by now. Several Pride events were canceled in Charlotte and Winston-Salem. Raleigh and Asheville have both postponed theirs in hopes that it'll be a safer time to do it. And then last year, Boone had its first Pride March, and the organization that came out of that is called Racial Kindred. Um, and we believe they are planning something related to Pride later in the year. And so hopefully stay tuned for local community opportunities coming soon.
Yeah, and Radical Kindred, you can find them on social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram. So definitely check them out. Um, and so the impact of COVID-19 extends beyond just Pride events being canceled or postponed. Specifically for the LGBTQ plus community, the Human Rights Campaign has done some research into the more specific impacts. What they found was that there's a higher number of the LGBTQ plus community working in service and the entertainment industry, and that due to having barriers to healthcare and careers, there's also a larger impact on physical health. So because they're not able to access medical care or medical leave and even basic necessities, that community is being impacted differently perhaps than other communities. And as we said earlier, the service and entertainment industry is being impacted. So because those are industries that have a lot of exposure with their communities or with people at large, and that increases the risk for exposure. If you think about, especially for college students, we had a lot of changes for university life, and students were asked to return home or to leave campus due to the residence halls not being a safe place. So that leads potentially to separation from community supports, increased isolation, and perhaps even being quarantined in unsafe or non-affirming spaces. There's also during quarantine the potential increase for social media exposure, and you think about all the impacts that social media can have on mental health as well. And there's also the adjustment to having online courses, working from home, that can have a lot of impact on our students. And then just general concerns regarding health for when people do return to public settings, such as grocery shopping, having a potentially higher increase for anxiety or concerns for physical health. So those are just some of the more specific impacts on the LGBTQ community.
It's also important to consider intersectionality when we talk about the effects of the COVID pandemic. Intersectionality, as some of you probably know, is a word coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black woman psychologist. And she used the word intersectionality to talk about the disproportionate effects of people with more than one minoritized identity that are intersecting. And so for those individuals, there can be unique challenges and stressors. And so, for example, age is an identity. We know that the pandemic is affecting older people at a higher rate. Gender, if people have gone home from where they lived in Boone or in the residence halls and are staying with family, you might be expected to conform to certain types of gender roles in the house. Race and ethnicity, as Blake has talked about, some of the earlier Black leaders of the movement and the ways in which they were not accepted. And we say that a lot, obviously, in the news today. And race and Black people and Latinx people are being affected or dying at higher rates from COVID. SES, people with making less, SES stands for socioeconomic status, so people making less money are more likely to be in the jobs that are considered mandatory or to have lost their job at this point. And then religion and spirituality. If you're forced to go back to an environment that is part of a religion or spirituality, or you're a part of a religion or spirituality that doesn't always affirm or doesn't do enough to affirm your sexual orientation or gender identity, this can make things a lot harder.
So with considering intersectionality and having intersecting identities that might be marginalized, there's already stressors there, as Julie was talking about, that can influence mental health, physical health, and there's the minority stress model, which comes from Meyer, and it kind of presents this idea that the prejudices, expectations of rejection, the stress of hiding your identities or concealing them and experiencing internalized homophobia, and we can even include internalized racism, internalized other isms to fall into that. But there's a compounding effect that can influence mental health, and that's minority stress. And so with that, there's a need for resiliency. So these things are happening, and how can we bounce back from them? How can we keep ourselves going? So that's a little bit about what we'll be talking about today. And there's different components to that. So there's intrapersonally, so resiliency with yourself, interpersonally, the support that you get from others, and then community resiliency. So the people within your local area or the communities that you identify with, how can they support you?
So we talked about a lot of Pride events being canceled or rescheduled. We talked about how COVID is affecting it. So what can we do? We want to explore some ways that you can still celebrate Pride. As Blake noted, how to tap into and build resiliency. And then we want to provide some resources that could be available to support you along the way. So as you're watching this, take a second to write or type these 3 questions and then try to answer them for yourself as we go through the rest of the workshop so that you can come out of this with a plan to make some small changes that will hopefully be helpful for you. So one thing that I will do to celebrate or honor Pride, 2 ways I will build resiliency in my life, and 1 resource I will try to use.
So personal or in-person prides may be canceled, but there are still creative ways that the LGBTQ plus community are engaging in to provide a sense of pride this month. And some of that is through virtual platforms. A few events that are happening is Global Pride on June 27th. And that it's going to be a 24-hour live streamed event. So you can show up at any point of the day and be a part of that. And it's being sponsored by Interpride and the European Pride Organizers Association. And so there's going to be speeches from activists, workshops, as well as performances from artists. And then there's also going to be Out Now Live, which is on June 22nd, and it's going to be a live broadcast via Them, which is an online magazine for LGBTQ plus issues. It's going to be broadcasted on their social media account, and it's sponsored by Them and Pitchfork. And we'll be having some performances and appearances by a variety of artists and celebrities. And so while it's really cool that the community is being creative about these events, it's also important to know that Pride doesn't have to be celebrated in this way. Pride doesn't have to be celebrated with a Pride March or Pride Parade. There are other ways to celebrate Pride too. And it can also be important to kind of consider the commercialization that can be involved with some of these events. And we encourage you to just check in with yourself and see what feels right for you, and just make decisions based on that in terms of how you celebrate Pride. But as I was saying, there are other ways to celebrate Pride. Some might feel more personal for you. So one way to do that is by writing a letter to yourself. As counselors, a lot of times we talk about expressive writing and writing letters to other people or even to yourself to support processing of things. And so for Pride Month, writing a letter to yourself could start off with asking yourself the question, what is something compassionate that you would want to share with your younger self? So a lot of times folks within the LGBTQ plus community aren't able to live authentically until later on. And so sometimes it can be helpful to connect with your younger self who may have had some stressful experiences, and to kind of connect with that part of your experience. Or even your present self. If you find yourself currently going through a tough time, think about how you would communicate with yourself, and something that would be meaningful for you to share with yourself. It can be helpful to think about what you would want to say to a friend or someone that you care about, or even what you would want to hear from someone that cares about you, to kind of get some ideas of how that letter might look. And alternatively, you could also write a letter to people who had leading roles in the Pride movement, whether that is from history or from current events, people who are currently involved in the fight for LGBTQ plus rights. So giving yourself a moment to think about, like, who are the people that I look up to and receive inspiration from? And what would it be like to write a letter as if I was communicating with them? What are the things that I would want them to know in terms of how they've impacted me? Just giving yourself space to honor that sense of pride from them. And finding meaningful ways to contribute or support causes that are important to you. There's a lot of local and national organizations that support causes and have ways of supporting those causes. So it can be helpful to connect with that. And then we'll be talking a little bit more about resiliency and some basic resiliency skills, as well as some resiliency strategies that might be helpful for the LGBTQ plus community.
So you may have seen this calendar floating around social media. This is another way that you can celebrate Pride. It gives you a kind of a prompt each day and the idea behind it. So for example, today is what's something you feel critical of in the queer world, and tomorrow is who is a queer mentor for you. So it's something that the idea behind it is to post it on social media with your answer in some written or video version. But you could also use this with a small group of friends if that feels better or safer, as a way to talk about these things. Or you could even use it as a journaling prompt if you wanted to do it just for yourself. So we've included a link here if you either haven't seen it or think it might be something that would be useful for you. We've also included some sources for documentaries and books and podcasts. This is a good way to, again, do something in either a small group or by yourself as a way to honor or learn more, or read something that matches, read or watch or listen to something that matches your values. And so we've included some ideas about the Stonewall protests. We've included things from a variety of identities on here, but really encourage you to find what works for you. And doing some research for this, we found lots of good, like top 20 LGBTQ plus documentaries for Pride Month or top 20 books. And so if that's something that's interesting to you, a quick Google can help you find something that might be a good fit for you.
So again, we've been talking about resiliency. So we'll dive into that. And so, as I said earlier, resiliency is kind of how that source of being able to bounce back from the stressors that we experience. So even while we're experiencing adversity or trauma, tragedy, threats, stress in general, it's how we are able to adapt to those and process them and continue moving forward. And as I mentioned earlier, there are different layers to that. So the interpersonal, and then community. So these can be a collection of strategies and processes that can be developed over time. So we all have the ability to have resiliency, and what we have currently doesn't have to stop right there. We can continue growing that and practicing those things over time.
So we want to give you some basic skills and strategies and basically practical things that you can do to build resiliency now. And so the first one is staying in touch with your support system in some way. And for some of you, you might be lucky enough to be in a living situation with people who are supportive of you, but we know that's not true for everybody. And so whether that's through Zoom or FaceTime or other social media, whether that's hanging out with people outside 6 feet away, whatever you can do to make sure that you're staying in touch with people who support you. And that can be especially important if you are in a living situation that doesn't feel very supportive, or if you're in a living situation that feels lonely as well. Another basic skill for resiliency is building structure into your days. And the pandemic has made this hard too. If you're taking classes online now, you probably used to rely on things like your class schedule or going to the dining hall to eat or club meetings to provide structure. And now a lot of us are having to provide that structure for ourselves and recognizing that we don't feel as good or as purposeful if we don't have it. And so even if you don't have to, going to bed or waking up at the same time can be important. Making sure you're taking a shower daily and changing your clothes regularly. Even if you're changing from one set of pajamas into another set of pajamas, that's okay. But make that part of your structure. The same for scheduling activities that you'll do regularly. And this can be stuff that you just need to do, like eat, where it can be tempting to just eat anytime. Do your regularly scheduled meals like you have in the past. It can be things like journaling. And make sure that you actually schedule in fun activities. We're more likely to do them if we do schedule them in. And that can be hanging out with people. That can be reading for fun or watching something for fun. That can be playing games online with your friends. Just make sure you're scheduling that stuff and being intentional about it. The next thing is doing something meaningful every day. We know that if we do meaningful things, we feel like we have more meaning and more purpose and feel more hope. And so some ideas for meaningful things could be creating art or journaling or listening to a podcast that upholds your values. And this will be different for each person, obviously, so you might be thinking of things that would be meaningful for you as well. One meaningful activity to engage in is to help someone else. So this could be telling somebody that you care about what they mean to you. It could be supporting someone else who needs support at the time. It could be something simple like smiling at somebody when they walk by. It could also be taking care of someone, whether that's a person like a child or a parent or an animal or a plant. Just knowing that you're caring for somebody else is often meaningful. And then finally, cultivating mindfulness can build resiliency. A simple definition for mindfulness is being in the present moment without judgment. And so not worrying too much about the past or the future, but trying to be in the moment. And there are a variety of ways to do that. Meditation can be a good one, and there are lots of meditations on YouTube, or we named a couple of apps that we like here, Mindfulness Coach or Talkspace. But it can also be other things. It can be as simple as reminding yourself to take 5 deep breaths when you're feeling stressed. One thing I like to do is to go on a walk, and instead of putting my earbuds in, I try to notice things with all five senses, and you'll be surprised of what you haven't noticed, even if you walked there 100 times already. And sometimes if that's too much, I'll do 5 minutes of that and then I'll listen to music for the rest of the time. But a little bit goes a long way with mindfulness. And there is a lot of research around mindfulness, reducing stress, anxiety, depression, things like that.
So building off of those practical things that you can be doing to support yourself, there are additional things that can be done that might relate more to your identity. If you identify as being within the LGBTQ plus community, one of those things is by identifying symbolic or intentional objects. So being able to surround yourself with things that might support feeling secure in your identity. What comes to my mind first is like thinking about pride flags. A lot of times during Pride Month, people might be showing off pride stickers or pride flags. And sometimes where we are might not feel super safe. So this can be as visible or as discreet as what feels comfortable for you. Definitely take that into consideration, but it can be something simple like putting a sticker on a water bottle. And maybe that's something that other people might not get the reference to, but it's something that you know and helps you connect to that sense of pride. It could even be a photo of you and your friends. Maybe it's something that you change your background to on your phone or your laptop. Maybe it's a book or just a note to yourself. Maybe putting a sticky note somewhere that you'll see daily. It can also be important to establish safe space. So especially if you're in a situation in which you're being quarantined with folks that may not feel super affirming or safe. So within that space, trying to find out where in that house or that apartment or whatever setting it is that feels safe for you or safest for you. So maybe that's the bathroom, or maybe it's out in the garage or on the back porch. Uh, Being able to point out like where it feels safest and making sure you're giving yourself time intentionally to be in this space, to ground yourself, to take a mindful break. If it's like on a back porch, maybe that's a place where you can practice some mindfulness and notice like what are the things going on outside, checking in with yourself. So establishing that space so that you can go to that when you need to is important. Um, Connecting to the LGBTQ plus culture and history. So we've shared a little bit about some documentaries and books that can be helpful, but there's film, music, visual art, lots of things that share the stories and experiences of LGBTQ plus folks. And so these can be sources for inspiration, strength, and hope. And it can also be important to kind of connect to those people who have been leaders in the Pride movement, as well as elders who are in the LGBTQ plus community, even fictional characters too. It doesn't have to be something that has happened in real life to find inspiration from. Um, Again, coming back to social media, it can be helpful when we have all this extra free time to make sure we're setting some mindful boundaries that feel right for us when using social media. Um, with the LGBTQ plus community, there can be a lot of stressors about body image or gender performance or coming out, how your lived experience is supposed to look like. And Being on these social media platforms more often might expose us more to specific viewpoints or ideas about ourselves. It even might be exposing us to viewpoints that other people have that aren't affirming of our identities. And so if you are spending time on social media and you're noticing some stress coming up, or maybe an overwhelming sense of emotions such as anger, sadness, hopelessness, be sure to give yourself some space to take a break from that, whether it's by just putting your phone down for the rest of the hour or rest of the day. Um, Even maybe removing some apps on your phone so that you have to actually like go to your laptop or to some other device to access social media. It could even be unfollowing people on Facebook if removing someone as a friend doesn't feel comfortable, unfollowing them to where you aren't seeing that on your timeline or in your newsfeed as often. But just being mindful about what you're feeling when you are on social media, and how you might change that relationship with it to better support yourself. Again, boundaries extend beyond social media. So with family and friends, if there are folks in your life who um, are behaving in a certain way or communicating in a certain way that feels uncomfortable, it can be important to communicate that in a way that feels safe for you, of course. But kind of letting other people in on your experience of the conversation or your experience of the relationship and what needs to change in order for you to feel safer, more supported. And we also know that sometimes we can set these boundaries and people may not respect them or uphold them. So when possible, it can be helpful to limit your time with these people, and also plan self-care around these interactions. So if you know you're going to have to be around a certain family member or a friend for however long, making sure you're maybe can go to your safe space in the house, or maybe you have a phone call with a friend later that evening to process the experience. So just kind of being intentional about when you're practicing that self-care. Then we've talked a little bit about this already, but connecting to sources of hope to feel inspired. There's a lot of use of the phrase "it gets better." There's a "it gets better" project, which is really like a helpful source of inspiration, and that can feel cliche sometimes, and that's okay. Um, and being able to connect to those experiences can feel meaningful. It can give us some hope to see how other people's experiences have turned out, or to see the actions that other people are taking to support certain movements in the world. Just tapping into other people's experiences as well as that source of hope. And again, I feel like within Pride history, resistance and advocacy has been a huge part of that. And so being able to tap into that can also be a part of LGBTQ plus resiliency. So finding ways to take a stand for the things that feel important to you, whether that's yourself specifically or the community that you identify with, or people that you care about if you're an ally. Um, and finding ways to do that. And that looks different for each person. So I've seen this metaphor used on social media, and I think it's really helpful. If you think about resistance or advocacy as being a multi-lane highway, we're all driving in the same direction, we're all trying to get to the same spot, and there's multiple lanes. If you're driving responsibly, you're not going to be in all the lanes at all times, driving around back and forth. That might be unsafe for yourself. And so you don't have to be in all lanes at all times. You might find the lane that feels right for you. So maybe that's virtual protesting, using social media as a way of advocacy. It could be attending in-person protests, or contributing to certain organizations or causes in monetary ways, or supporting certain artists or local businesses, things like that. So finding what lane feels comfortable for you to drive in, and also know that there's rest areas along the way too. So if you need to stop and take care of yourself, by all means, pull off the highway, and know that you have the option to get back on the highway when you're ready.
So here are some examples of what you might do for resistance or advocacy as resiliency. This is by no means an exhaustive list. Hopefully a lot of creative people find other ways to do this. And as you know, you're not going to, as Blake mentioned, drive in all lanes at the same time. So you're probably not going to do all of these at the same time. But talking to your friends or your family about what you believe in and why can be powerful. That can be powerful whether you're part of the minoritized community or not. Supporting causes by posting on social media or financially if you can. Attending a protest virtually or in person. We know that COVID makes some of these things harder. And so if you're living with somebody or you are somebody in a vulnerable position or with a vulnerability to COVID right now, that might be something you choose not to do now, but that would not mean that you would necessarily have to choose not to do it forever. And then do your own work to understand your biases, privileges, and disadvantages. We all have some of each of those things. And you've probably seen a lot of anti-racism lists going around the social media right now. And there are lists for a lot of minoritized identities, including LGBTQ plus identities. And being able to do some reading and do some of our own work is very important. And then finally, it's also very important to make sure that you're not pushing yourself further than you can go. We all have different levels of stress and anxiety in our lives, and we're all reacting to some extent to the pandemic. And it's important to attend to our burnout levels and self-care. If we're getting burnout, we're not helping ourselves, and chances are we're not helping other people as much as we want to. And so being gentle with yourself and recognizing that if the level you want to go to, you're not quite making it, that doesn't mean that you won't at some point. It just means that right now you need to take care of yourself a little bit more.
Compile a list of LGBTQ plus resources, some campaigns or organizations that are local to North Carolina are Radical Kindred, Equality NC, and the Campaign for Southern Equality. We've also listed a lot of the Trevor Project resources. So there's some phone lines, confidential forums, and even online chats. And there's some other resources as well. The LGBT National Health Center, the Trans Lifeline. There's the Lighthouse blog, which is this group that I think is based in New York, but they provide affirming healthcare and mental health care. They have a blog that has some pretty good articles that come out weekly for that. And then them is the online, I guess like zine or magazine platform. And then I think it can be helpful to use social media to your advantage if there are queer positive or LGBTQ plus positive accounts that you see, like adding those to your timeline to follow and get that support through social media.
Mm-hmm.
Also about our services.
Yeah, so some of our services that we're offering this summer, the way to get in touch with us first is through a phone consultation. So if you call us, our phone number is listed there. We'll get you set up to talk with a therapist, usually the next day, to help you figure out what would be the best fit for you. And some of the things that we are offering are telemental health services. So we can do therapy through telemental health now, as well as these other things like these workshops. We definitely offer emergency services. If you're in the midst of an emergency, you can call us. Like we mentioned earlier, it's helpful to speak to somebody in your area. And so if you're not in the Boone area, there's some good resources on our website about how to find a mental health emergency resource in your area. We can also help you find that if you want to call us for that.
Just some reminders. Trust yourself and your experiences. We've shared a lot of information, and there's a lot of even more information out there. And so just the decisions that you make, make sure that those feel comfortable for you. think we've talked a lot about doing what you can and when you can and how you can. There's, again, a lot of different options, and safety is important, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, and then check out some of our other recorded workshops that might provide support regarding some of the experiences you may have. And if you have any questions about our services, definitely give us a call. And if you have watched this for extra credit, we will be sure to include a link below in the bio for this YouTube video. And if you are viewing this on another platform and are unable to find that link, contact us or phone or through that platform, and we can send that evaluation to you, and that will connect you with the attendance verification. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Bye-bye.